Name of the podcast is Dream Plan Execute, where I identify and highlight people who dream frictionless, plan thoroughly, execute relentlessly. And Charles Ma, you are one of those persons. I just want everyone to get a chance to be a part of your story, how you got started.
I was born in China during the one-child policy. I have an older sister, so my parents found a way to get me out of the country. I liked high school physics, especially statics, because everything balanced out and everything just kind of like was steady. It made sense. Right now, like what I'm getting into is I'm founding a startup, construction technology startup. Why did I go and start something new? Like I'm definitely not the kind of guy who's always been like, I need to be a founder. I just start my own company. Being in the field, talking to contractors, PMs, superintendents every day, what I grew to understand is the root cause of a lot of challenges do not start in the field. By the time the field experiences a challenge, there's had to have been so many different things to have already failed with AI, with language-based AI. Like a lot of the currency of the design to construction process is based on documents, whether that's drawings or verbal documents, text-based documents. And that is something that AI today is very good at working with. Then the opportunity of AI allows for maybe some value to be built to help reduce this friction, this pain. And then I just kind of had a thought of like, well, why not? Why not try? Why not me? That being said, it's not like a model will just come right fully baked out of the oven, ready to answer all of your questions, but like the promise is there. Take cold calls, for example. There's this metric out there that's like make 50 cold calls a day, and that's kind of a metric of like a productive day. And there was a point where like the feedback and traction we were getting was not strong. And there was a part of me that was like, I should be making 50 calls a day because that's how I know I'm being productive. And then there was a part of me that was like, no, maybe just stop and like maybe just go for a walk and think about why like it's not working and what you should do instead. Being intentional about what is it that you're trying to do. Second, have good mentors who can like give you good resources about like they had done, and then create that plan and stick to it. At a certain point, you have enough conversations, you get to an idea, and you realize, yeah, I think there's something here. I'm fighting a bit of a cold, so if I sneeze, apologies in advance.
No, I think you're going to be fine, man. I'm happy that you're able to come onto the podcast. Name of the podcast is Dream Plan Execute, where I identify and highlight people who dream frictionless, plan thoroughly, execute relentlessly. And Charles Ma, you are one of those persons. I just want everyone to get a chance to be a part of your story, how you got started, and where your trajectory is carrying you. So, for the listening audience, who is Charles Ma, and like how did you start getting into what you are into today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like my path to getting where I am is definitely more accidental than intentional. So right now, like what I'm getting into is I'm founding a startup, construction technology startup, where that was actually how you and I met when I was doing research for ideation, calling, just cold calling project managers across the country. And I remember you said something about like, you felt like the universe had a way of bringing people together that needed to bring to be together, and I thought that was really cool. And but yeah, so I think for me, how I got to this step, like maybe chronological is a good place to start. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so my childhood was kind of interesting. I was born in China during the one-child policy, and I have an older sister. So my parents found a way to get me out of the country, which is, if you know my parents, like that would be a pretty hard to believe considering how like reserved and kind of steady they are. For them to kind of go and do something crazy like that is pretty impressive. So yeah, they brought me and my family over to the US. I grew up in Southern California. Yeah, and I really kind of fell into structural engineering. I was good at math and physics. I liked high school physics because, especially statics, because everything balanced out and everything just kind of like was steady. It made sense. So that and the fact that my sister was studying architecture That's how I selected civil engineering. Um, but it was a far cry from like a passion or anything like that. And after a couple years as a practicing structural engineer, and you take a project from start to finish, you kind of scale that initial learning curve, you realize the next 40 years of your career are going to be the same, more or less. And that's when I was like, okay, I really want to do something different. So thus began, like, I was really trying pretty desperately to change my career. I like applied unsuccessfully to business school. I like applied to a bunch of tech jobs. And it was really serendipitous that I met um, Marav Oren, who is the CEO and co-founder of Versatile, former CEO. And, you know, she kind of took a chance on me. She was like, listen, you're really young and inexperienced, and we are a bootstrapping company. We do not have the resources to bring someone along, but like, I like your energy, I like your vibe, and you're giving me a reason to say yes. So she offered me an objectively terrible deal. So for $15 an hour, I would kind of be the eyes and ears for Versatile at their first project. It was supposed to be the Chase Center in San Francisco, which was kind of down the street from my office. So from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., I would be on site and then go to my day job afterwards. So that really worked out because I ended up being the first US employee at Versatile as they grew from a bootstrapping company to an $80 million Series B. And I got to learn a lot. It was a great learning experience. So I was the first product manager, the first customer success manager. I was head of data insights, and I was an account manager. I did sales and very briefly head of technical support. So really got the whole gamut of early stage construction tech experience. And for why did I go and start something new? Like, I'm definitely not the kind of guy who's always been like, I need to be a founder. I need to start my own company. But what I noticed is, so Versatile, like a lot of construction tech companies of the early 2020s, like Open Space, like Reconstruct, was about data capture, like reality capture from the field.
Right.
And being in the field, talking to contractors, PMs, superintendents every day, like, what I grew to understand is the root cause of a lot of challenges do not start in the field. By the time the field experiences a challenge, there's had to have been so many different things to have already failed. And then you get to the point where you're like, okay, well, now the crane is sitting idle for 2 hours.
Right.
Um, right. So yeah, and you understand this well, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, it's amazing when you said that because I started smiling because the truth is, being a assistant project manager for some years and then going being a superintendent myself, you find that a lot of the problems stem well before you got to the job site, right? The job. There was this senior structural vice president that I used to work on when I started early in AE competition, and he would mention you can't fix a bad buy. Like if you
Yeah.
buy it wrong, it just snowballs into more problems and more problems and more problems. So you can't fix a bad buy. So I always thought about that in my head when I was in the field, and I would get contracts or work that wasn't bought the best way. And so it just causes anytime you have like friction between trades or like scope in not clear, usually it's not clear in the contract too, right?
Hmm.
Like who owns
Hmm.
it and who's going to perform that scope of work. And so yeah, you have idling. Of course, there's like mismanagement of logistics, like someone missed an email. But separate from that event happening, most times on a job, the clarity that's not in the contract also bubbles into the field, right?
Yeah.
And so you thinking about going upstream is the right approach because most people or most startups try to fix the problem that's immediately in the field, where majority of the problems stem from the lack of communication from the officer of procurement, not really diving into the details of the field. And like you said, there's like a discrepancy between what the guys in the field need and what is bought on the job. What I
Hmm.
really admire about your story is one is recognizing early that something didn't align with your ikigai, right? So
Hmm.
I always mention ikigai in the podcast because I think it's just a really clean way of identifying your soul and your life purpose, which is what you're good at, what you love doing, what people pay for, and what the world needs, right? And for you, like, you're good at math, right? You're good at physics. So you're like, all right, let's try structural engineering. You do it, you're good at it, you will make good money, and you're like, this is not for me for the rest of my life.
Yep.
And you're like, all right, well, let me find a way to find something that aligns more with all of those things, but I love doing it also. And so you innately got into the approach of, hey, I want to solve problems in construction technology, which is fascinating. It's a budding industry because construction can be a little bit old school the way we approach things. We can be really good at building buildings, but we're really stubborn in adopting new technology. So how do you find the importance of, say, AI products in construction now, and how do you see the construction industry with the implementation of AI?
Yeah, I mean, kind of to your point there about construction being slow to adopt, I think I put more of the responsibility on the technology than on the industry.
Mm,
Like there was nobody who like before 2007 was like, I really need a touchscreen phone that does everything. But
right,
something was created that was so easy to use and just delighted the customer. And I think the challenge with construction technology is that there hasn't been a solution that really understands like all of the nuances of the industry and solves those kinds of issues, with the exception, of course, of the success stories like your Procore, like Autodesk, PlanGrid, and those are pretty few and far between. But they really did create a product that solved a clear problem and delighted the customer. Was really easy, kind of a no-brainer, and the industry adopted it. And I think that's proof positive that it's more on the responsibility falls more on the technology than on the uh, the industry. So, to your question about AI in construction, I think the most exciting thing about AI, because there's a lot of hype, but the way that I would look at it is AI enables pattern recognition. So the previous generation of software as a service, they were workflow tools that made processes easier and faster and more accurate. But a lot of the value there was making them more clean, more simple, more easy to use, and it didn't really get to the heart of the matter. So my old head of product, chief product officer at Versatile, he would call it the shit, like the real shit, like
right,
there's no software that can really do it. And I think what AI enables is starting to deliver value towards the real shit where it requires people with a lot of experience. It requires tribal knowledge. It requires context of all of the different stakeholders and factors and nuances that are changing from project to project. Um, that being said, it's not like a model will just come right fully baked out of the oven, ready to answer all of your questions. But like the promise is there. Like what the industry would, I think what the industry can do to help create this sort of like positive cycle is to bring in AI companies that have the right approach and allow them to help train these models to get to a point where there's tremendous value being delivered. Because models today, they're either very good at being very generic or they're very bad at being very specific. So if you
right.
want something that's good and specific, you have to let it train with your specific users and your specific use cases.
What I like about your approach also is that you've actually worked traditionally in the product or solution that you're trying to provide, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of disconnect happens in construction because it's such a highly skilled for what it does, But then you're building a software for construction, then most times a skilled software person doesn't understand what you do in construction, right? And what's like the processes of what you're doing. And so like having your background being in that industry and seeing what the process is, uh, I can't sum it up any better than the CEO of Nvidia. He's like, right now, back in the early 2000s, you would tell kids like going to software programming or software engineering. Right now, he's like, with AI and what it can do, you shouldn't be just focused on writing good code. Our intent is for you to have domain knowledge and then have the code help you solve the domain knowledge problem that you have, right? So, your intent now isn't to just become a software engineer. It's like really get good at biomedical engineering, really get good at construction management or design implementation, and then find the domain problems there and use software and don't let the friction point of coding be an issue anymore so that you can solve more domain problems. So
Yeah, and that's a really exciting idea for people like us because I do remember like talking with my friends who were in my graduating class, um, and also civil structural engineers, and just kind of lamenting how when you're picking which branch of engineering, it's all pretty hard. It's all like relatively the same amount of challenge in terms of like your course load and like the content and stuff. But what they don't really tell you unless you actually do the work of doing your own research, which you know I failed to do, that's on me, is like the pay scale is tremendously different. Like
yeah, they didn't forget to tell you that. Yep.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like you come out of school, you get a master's degree, and you're like, what? Like, wait, my buddy's gone to Google. He's making like 150K right out of college.
Yes. Yep.
It's like, I'm
I,
making a third of that. So,
yeah, it's funny you said that because when I left, I'm like, all right, dusting my shoulders off. I'm going to go become a serious geotechnical or structural engineer. And like how ended up, I did my minor in construction management, but at the time I'm leaving school and they give me my first offer, and I'm like, how am I going to live off this? Like,
yeah,
I have,
right.
like, if I think of my dad's a CPA, and he's like, yeah, any number you get, just times it by point 0.7 because you're single and not having the kids. That's what you're going to lose as taxes.
Yeah,
And like I'm like backing my way into the math. And I'm like, this math isn't mathing. Like, how am I going to pay for my student loan, send money
right.
home to mom, and like actually eat just a regular lunch? This doesn't work. And so you find yourself like, I'm like, maybe this is not where I need to be. And management companies just tend to pay you a little bit more coming out. I'm like, all right, well, this is the path that's chosen for me now. I shall
Right.
tie
Yeah,
my shoes on and just keep going. But yeah, no, the pay ranges in engineering is so different based
yeah,
on which one you pick and the companies you end up at, right? Like,
totally. Yeah,
yes,
and I think there for a long time there was some regret about like, oh, I should have gone into, software engineering or something. But I'm glad that with AI, it's kind of
it's kind of
leveling the playing
leveling
field.
out everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's big. And so no, once you went through working at Versatile, you became a account manager, product manager, success manager, and then what made you want to start Scoreboard AI and why focus in on the problems in construction?
Yeah. So I think like um, different people have different motivations and triggers. I think I definitely have like a fairness trigger. Like when I feel like some injustice has been done, like
Right.
it really gets to me. And I think the great injustice in construction. So this story, or this was actually Lucas Manos from Ryan Companies. He kind of told me this of like, in construction, builders are incentivized to build with high quality, on schedule, and within budget.
Hmm.
But all three of these things, quality, budget, and schedule, are dependent on other people doing their jobs. Other people being the owner, the designer.
Right.
Um, but these other people, the designers specifically, have different incentives. So they are incentivized to spend as little time as possible to get the design close enough to get a building permit, and then they kind of like wash their hands of it. And so,
Oh man, you are hitting nails on the head like no tomorrow. But yeah, you're right. Keep going.
right. And I
Yeah.
think like that, when then you add in the last part where there's very little accountability, right? So
Mm,
even if there is some cost add that is the responsibility of the designer or the owner, sometimes builders are still splitting the cost because, oh, you should have caught it. Like you're the construction professional.
right.
And that to me, like the combination of the unfairness, the lack of accountability, like really is it just really gets to me. And I think like that's
Right.
something that I kind of like somewhat understood for a long time, even when I was in as working as a structural engineer, doing construction administration, like
Mhm.
sketching up little like as built, solutions to problems in the field. So I think like what got me excited is that with AI, with language-based AI, like a lot of the currency of uh, the design to construction process is based on documents, whether that's drawings or verbal documents, text-based documents. Um, and that is something that AI today is very good at working with. So it seemed, and at that time when I had first started, I didn't really crystallize like exactly what the idea was going to be, but kind of like the combination of these like nebulous concepts of like one, this great unfairness in the industry that no one else seems to really be tackling, right? Like there's a
Mm,
lot of like point solutions about this workflow or this user or that persona, but like it's the system itself where everything is set up in a way that like it is causing the inefficiencies. And then the opportunity of AI allows for maybe some value to be built to help reduce this friction, this pain. And then I just kind of had a thought of like, well, why not? Why not try? Why not me? Let's see, let's see how it goes. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
no, I
pretty much what I
like
got.
your approach because one thing is that it really highlights is systems thinking, right? And that's like a buzzword, but really it we learned or right now I'm in the accelerate program at AECOM and they talk about global mindset and systems thinking, even in the PMP exam, right? Like, as a professional project manager, that's one of the exams you're looking to take, right? And I'm studying for it at the moment, and one of the values you bring or one of the principles of the PMP, the PMBOK, is systems thinking, like
Hmm.
thinking not just in isolation of each individual problem, but thinking globally how you can reduce friction point.
Yeah.
And I like bringing things back to like a sports mindset. One of
Yeah.
the greatest things that I love to watch is Formula One. And the reason
Hmm.
for that is not even just for the race; it's for the pit stops. I love to see car comes in, pop the tires off, pop the tires back on. Everyone knows what they
Yep.
need to do. Everyone has their plan. Everyone's
Yep.
executing at the highest level. It's not just the driver driving on the road who's going to win the race. It's the
Hmm.
tires being prepped before he gets into the pit stop, the bolts being ready. Everyone knows what they need to do when he's coming in. Everyone's communicating on the same page. He's coming in right now. No one's taking a bathroom break. Now is the time to execute, right? And
Yep.
so if you look at the early parts of Formula One in the 90s, the pit stop used to be 10 seconds. Now
Hmm.
it's like a little shy above 2 seconds. And that puts miles on the clock or on lap times. And the
Yeah.
highest level Formula One teams are around 2 seconds. The ones that are at
Yeah.
the lower level are around 6 to 10 seconds still, right? So you can see that just fixing these smaller inefficiencies in the pit stops gives the driver, which is the construction team, the ability to put more miles, be more efficient where they need to be. So,
Yeah, and so I love that example, and I also love analogies. So I
mhm,
think the analogy for construction would be like if each of the pit stop crew members worked for a different company. You had
right,
your tire guy who works for the tire company. You have your fuel guy who works for the fuel subcontractor, and the none of them have really seen the car before. They're just looking at PDF drawings of a car, and then it
right,
rolls in, and the car is different from what the drawing said,
right,
and I think like that's like the folly of trying to dig in on these process improvements when you're set up to fail. It's
Right.
like like let's start with kind of like the big fundamental challenges, and then we can get to a point where we're ready to make these micro improvements. But I think we're far from that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm happy that someone like yourself is tackling these issues. It's such a global and difficult problem with so much nuances. So one of my questions to you is like, how do you go about putting together and executing a plan of like starting an AI company and actually breaking down a problem and getting to the point where like this is what I want to execute, and how do you really day to day, like people use buzzwords like plan, execute, dream, right? Like, how do you,
Mhm.
what's your day to day mechanics of executing?
Yeah, so I think like there's a couple layers there. I think like one is it depends on what phase you're in,
Hmm.
and what is your like what are you trying to do on a given particular day. So I think one sort of like meta point is like one big difference that I didn't really notice or appreciate until I'm at a point now where I'm kind of setting my own schedule is like it's really important to understand like why you're doing everything that you're doing. Because let's take cold calls for example.
Right.
You know, I was there's this metric out there that's like you make 50 cold calls a day, and that's kind of a metric of like a productive day. And there was a point where like, you know, we were evaluating a couple different use cases that were not that the feedback and traction we were getting was not strong.
Mm.
And there was a part of me that was like, I should be making 50 calls a day because that's how I know I'm being productive. And then there was a part of me that was like, no, maybe just stop and like maybe just go for a walk and think about why like it's not working and what you should do instead. And I think that like being intentional and questioning like why you're doing what you're doing, I think like that's maybe the most important sort of like meta point. And then like beyond that, as far as like the tactical part, like I think one of my mentors, Tessa Lau, who's the CEO and founder of Dusty Robotics, kind of shared with me, was kind enough to share with me her process when she was doing ideation. So she recommended a book called Four Steps to the Epiphany, and a book called The Mom Test about how to really um, do the research that you need to do ideation. So I remember I was on the phone with her, and I was kind of pitching her the initial idea.
Mm.
And the initial idea was about something about RFIs and risk and using data analysis to get into that. Um, and she said like, it sounds like you're trying to convince yourself that this is a good idea. And she was like, how do you know that it's a good idea? Uh, and you know, part of me was like, well, I just know I have this experience. I've like, but the truth was I didn't know. And that's really the whole purpose is like, you have to go out and learn and find out. And I think through that process, like there's so much that like, yeah, just kind of like going through that process and understanding like even if there are parts of it that are way outside of my comfort zone, like for example, making those 50 cold calls a day, like that is not something that I was
That's
comfortable with
tough.
at all. Yeah. But towards the end of it, I got pretty comfortable with it. So I think like that is, yeah. So I guess maybe taking a step back to your original question, first is like being intentional about what is it that you're trying to do. Second, like have good mentors who can like give you good resources about like, you know, what they had done, and then like create that plan and stick to it. And that plan, like it wasn't too granular in terms of like, you know, phase one, phase two, phase three, because so much of it is changing and so much of it is really based on gut feel. But I do, yeah, remember like at a certain point, you have enough conversations, you get to an idea, and you realize like, yeah, I think there's something here. Yeah,
What I like about what you said is being intentional. So that's really super important to dive in on because I've studied I love studying people who execute at the highest level, right? So
yeah,
talk about sports athletes, right? How do they execute at the highest level, right? And like someone who gets gains or strength gains in the gym or speed gains on the track, how do they go about their thought process of executing day to day training, right? And something that always comes up is the being intentional, right? Like
Yeah.
you can run on the treadmill for a mile, right? And you're just running to survive. Whereas someone else is on the treadmill and they're focused on how their foot is hitting the treadmill. They're focused on their form. They're focused on being intentional in the moment and paying attention to their form, their pacing, their breath, and those small attentions to all those small things. It starts getting better and better, and then they start getting faster and faster because they're becoming more and more efficient, right?
Hmm.
And so you could have two persons starting the same time, going to the gym the same time. But if someone's not intentionally being mindful of the way they approach their training, they're not going to get the same gains as someone else who is. The next thing you said is super important is having a mentor because a lot of times you can go to the gym by yourself and a coach gives you really good cues on how to lift weights, right?
Yeah.
And you can have the intention, you could be passionate, driven, but if your form is bad on a deadlift, you're going to get injured, right? If your form is bad in running, you're going to get a knee injury. So just being blissfully enthusiastic is not enough to be successful, right?
Yes.
Like it's like being enthusiastic, being disciplined. You have to do everything at the same time well, or try to do them as well as you can. So having a coach kind of guide you through and give you cues on certain lifts. Like sometimes I see guys deadlifting in the gym and they're leading with their back. But if they knew someone was like, no, you lead with your legs, you're pushing with your legs first, and then your back follows, then that's a completely different neuromuscular requirement and your intent when you're lifting changes completely, right? So
Yeah.
that person that you bounce out that idea off, she gave good advice by just saying, well, how do you know, right? Like challenge it. Like, are you sure about that? Is it worth investing your time and effort in spending resources and time executing down that rabbit hole to find out that it doesn't work? So,
Hmm.
and then getting the courage to cold call is, I don't think, unless you've cold called, it is no, I don't think anyone understands how difficult it is to get on the phone,
I'll,
especially in 2024 when there's so
I'll,
much scams going on.
I'll tell you a quick story of one of my first cold call experiences. So this was like, you know, how, in retrospect, how not to cold call is to like try to say someone else's words.
Mm,
So I like called some project manager and he picked up the phone and I was like, hello, are you passionate about like resolving inefficiencies and doing this and that? And he was like, well, it's my job. Like I wouldn't say I'm passionate about it. And I
right.
was like, oh yeah, cool, cool, cool. Like in my in my head, I was like, yeah, me neither. But like, and like my wife was sitting on the couch behind me, just like dying. I was like, I
Sure,
feel
right.
like such an idiot. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, those are good because like you catch yourself and the guy, the one thing you find with PMs are just people in construction. They're like, just get to the point. Like,
yeah,
stop
exactly,
playing with my time. Like,
exactly.
I have a bunch of fires going on, and you
Yeah,
calling me about being passionate
yeah,
about solving
exactly.
inefficiencies. Just tell me what you want. What do you want?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, by the time you got to me, you clearly cleaned it up because when I answered the phone with you, one, I just resonated with the problem you're solving, and I know how hard it is to cold call. So once you got on the phone, it was really buttery smooth. You're like, hey, this is what I'm trying to solve, right? And I'm calling project managers to find out any feedback they can give us on this problem I'm trying to solve. And
Hmm.
then, it just takes away all of the annoyance that you would get. Because you're like, all right, I know exactly what this person wants and I can give it to them right now, right?
Hmm.
Versus don't butter me up about carry me up. My boss would say, don't carry me down country roads. Just give it to me
Yeah.
straight, straight line, talk straight, tell me what you want. I can give it to you and we can move on. And but in that process of hearing, what you're trying to solve,
Yeah.
and you knowing the pain point that myself or someone else has, I'm like, oh, this is really interesting that someone's paying attention to this pain point. This is not something to not pay attention to. It's only going to help me in the future if this guy or person executes this problem or
Right.
solves this problem. So yeah, I want to give you as much information as I can to solve it. So no, that's really good. And then how did you go about figuring out? Because I'm sure as you're building yourself, you identified some of your signature strengths or things that you needed to work on. Like, how did you go about like this is my strength and I have a weakness here and develop that weakness?
Yeah, so I think like one strength that I think I'm pretty fortunate to have is that I do feel like I'm pretty fungible. Like the cold calling, for example, like, you know, the analogy is like you're talking about working out in the gym. Like if you're doing squats and like you're pushing yourself and objectively you feel terrible. Like
Right.
it feels terrible. And then
100%.
afterwards you feel fantastic. Like if you were sitting on the couch and you felt the way that you feel when you do squats, you would probably call 911 because it feels so terrible.
Right.
So I think it's a lot about like contextualizing the pain, right?
Mm,
It's like when I put myself in a situation that I'm not comfortable with, like cold calling, like doing door-to-door sales, and part of me just wants to turn around and go home. Um, but then there's another part of me that's like, well, I'm supposed to be feeling this pain because I'm doing this because I know that I'm not good at this. And by doing this, I will hopefully get more comfortable at it and kind of like contextualizing, like, I'm doing squats right now. It's supposed to feel kind of weird.
right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the context in which you frame your mind. I mean, it's just the half full, half empty glass. Like these are like I find that these profound proverbs we say them, but because it was so profound at the time, it became colloquial language we
Yes.
say it, but then they
Yeah.
don't really resonate on like how profound it is because everyone says it, right? And like
Yep.
really like the way you shape your reality is by leaning to positivity or negativity. Like I always say on the podcast that where you stand is technically the center of the universe because the universe grows infinitely in all direction, right?
Yeah.
And similarly with a celestial body, right? It can either be a sun or a black hole. One gives off light and things orbit around it and attract to that light, and other just takes and sucks and grabs but doesn't give back anything at all, right? And you
Hmm.
can see the difference between a celestial solar system with a black hole in the middle versus one with a sun in the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
So in that grand aspect of things, just lean in on being a son, right? Like it's not going to be great each day, but your light will shine through, which you did. Because I'm telling you, I get cold called for everything on my phone, but it didn't mean that I wanted to stay on the phone with any of them. I'm like, all right, banger, bang, 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 bang. Nope, not interested. Don't want to hear it. But then you came on, and you could hear your passion through the way you communicated, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, well, whatever I was doing, I'll sit aside 5 minutes to talk to you. So, whenever you're doing something, just, lean in on that passion and people hear it or resonate with it and they'll kind of, gravitate to it. So that's
Yeah.
really I think one of your signature strengths is that your passion comes through when you speak, because
Thank
you
you.
are genuinely passionate about the problem. So,
Yeah.
but while in this execution phase, I'm sure there are things that came across. Like, execution is the hardest part of the dream plan execute portion because it's where the rubber meets the road, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's the part you do all the planning to make the execution a lot more seamless. But regardless of what you do, you're gonna run into problems and decisions you have to make. So, what decision did you make initially that you doubted, but it turned out to be like a game changer in your career or your development into Scoreboard AI?
Yeah. I think a decision that I doubted because my wife was like, "Oh, you should talk about taking that $15 an hour offer from Versatile." But truthfully, like I never doubted that for a second because there was zero downside for me. It's like, hey, this is a foot in the door, so there was no doubt there. I would say working with Seraphim, Seraphim Suhanki, our CTO and co-founder. not anything personal with him. It was like, last year I left Versatile in August to work on Scoreboard, and I did have a technical co-founder, and we did have to kind of break up by December. And I was at a point where it was like, okay, talking to my advisor, Martin Fisher, like, do we need a technical co-founder? Can we pull this off as like a solo founder and bring on employees? Um, and right around the time, like I definitely wasn't expecting to just immediately jump back in the co-founder matching market and find a technical co-founder.
Right.
But it happened to be the holidays, and the YC co-founder matching platform is like pretty active in the holidays. People are at home with their families, realizing like maybe I can do something different. So I talked with a few people. One of them was Seraphim, and Seraphim was definitely by far the most like impressive, and he was also like very straightforward about what his expectations were. I asked him, what is the difference between an early employee and a co-founder? And he's like, co-founder will work for free, right, for equity,
Right.
versus an employee, like, you work for money. And he laid out very clear from the beginning. He's like, I'm really good. Once you start working with me, you'll see that I'm really good. And in order to start working together, like, we're going to need like basically a 50-50 split. And um, at there was some question marks, right? Because it's like what I had proposed was something more like a trial period, where
Okay.
it's like, okay, we have this, I had this idea for an initial sort of like set of features, and we can use that to get feedback from potential customers. And it wasn't a huge, ask. And the thought was, okay, once we get past this initial part, then we can say like, and if we still like working with each other, let's be co-founders. And
Right.
he like was, he knew what he brought to the table, and he negotiated pretty hard.
Right.
And I got to a point where I was like kind of rationalizing it out, right, where it's like, okay, so assuming and assuming that Seraphim is really good, and we bring him on for the equity, like, that would be great, right? If he's not good, we bring him on. There's a 1 year cliff. So if we part ways within a year, there's really no downside.
Right.
Um, Assuming that we turn down this offer and go find somebody else. If somebody else is really good, then there's some reasonable chance that they will have similar expectations as Seraphim.
Right.
So, like, going down this other path is like there's some risk that we never find someone really good. There's some risk that it takes a long time, and some risk that even if we do find someone good after some period of time, that they end up with just the same set of requirements.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, let's just take the plunge and let's get started. And especially after the months of 2023, where it felt like no progress had been made, I was just really eager to get started. And it turned out great. Like, not only are Seraphim's skills like really top notch, he is definitely a 10x engineer, if not more so. But also, kind of what you were talking about today about the disc personality thing, like,
Right.
it's not just skill set that's important to be a good fit. It's also personality and the way that we approach problems, the way that we think about problems, and the way that we resolve problems is very much aligned and similar. And like, we're talking through the ideation process and getting to a point where it's like, wow, like, I don't think I could have expected that, like
Right.
it would be such a good match. So yeah, that's something where there was definitely some doubt initially, and within my range of expectations, the outcome is far beyond the high end of like my range of expectations. So worked out
Yeah, no,
nice.
it's one of those things where like you I like how you went through not making a rash decision, but you did also push the pace, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you sat down, you thought about it, you did your if then statements, and you went down all the different ifs then before actually having to physically go down the process. And you're like, well, if anyone's very good at their job, they're gonna hold the line on what they expect, right? Like BMW doesn't change its price because someone comes in and asks for a price change, right? You can
Right.
go and get a valued brand somewhere else.
Right.
We know the value that we bring or he brings, like, this is what I want. And I know
Yep.
I'm willing to work hard to prove to you that I can be that value add to your team. And you gotta respect it. Like the person knows what they want and they're willing to, put their money where their mouth is by saying that I can produce that product you're looking for. So,
Totally.
and if someone's good, they're gonna have that type of energy with certain things. So you're like, all right, let's see if you really are about it, and then the person is, and like you said, complementary skills also too. Like I always think of there's personality traits that may be different, but and cognitive speeds might be different too. But you
Hmm.
guys have the same goal in mind, right? Like
Yep.
uh, a wide receiver playing a quarterback role just wouldn't work. A quarterback
Right.
trying to be a wide receiver wouldn't work. But as a team, you double down on each other's cognitive strength and speed, and together with team synergy, you win, right? And
Hmm.
that's the goal, is to, we're better as together than separate. And you have to find
Absolutely.
those individuals who can be your wide receivers, who can be your offensive linemen, who can be your cornerbacks, and then put the team together and you get that synergistic energy going. And we're going to focus all of that down to get the touchdown, right? And so I think
Right.
innately, the reason we love sports is because it kind of, we see that on display, and we gravitate to seeing a well executed team working together, right? Like,
Yeah.
it, who doesn't love to see a game of a guys in basketball passing the ball around and then shooting the ball, and it looks like it's effortless, but it's hard work and training that got them to that point, right?
Yeah. I totally agree. I think like there's something about sports that's like a Darwinian experiment on steroids where it's
Right,
so competitive, so fast, it evolves so quickly. Like you see the team dynamics, the personalities, like the personalities of your superstars today, like LeBron and Curry, are
right,
so different from like Michael Jordan, who is this
right,
huge asshole, or like young
right,
Kobe. And like
right.
you can kind of see like how it changes over
Yeah,
time.
like just think of Draymond Green and Steph Curry. Like
Right,
their energies are completely different. They're on the same
right.
team though, right? And
Yes,
and and even with Jordan being the way he was, uh, Jordan also needs someone even worse than him, which was uh his defensive end basically would just pull. Well, Scottie Pippen was real even keen, right?
hmm,
Like Scottie Pippen on his team was super even keen and balanced out him and what's the name of his next guy? He was really good. Who was the defensive guy?
Rodman.
Rodman. Oh my
Yeah.
God! Like Rodman would poke at people. He would just like
Yeah.
and in between him, Jordan, and Scottie Pippen, like you couldn't beat them. Like if
Right.
Scottie didn't get to you by being Mr. Smooth Criminal, you had Pippen down there. Just like it was just a good team synergy between the three of them, and like LeBron still needed Kyrie Irving, Kobe needed Shaq, right?
Yeah.
LeBron needed Dwayne Wade. Like you never really find a team where there's just this one guy and there's no one
Right.
else with complementary or supporting skills for you to win. You just can't, right? So,
Hmm.
all right. So then, who? I mean, like, on your progress to being CEO of OpenAI, I'm sure you had people you admired and like who supported you on your journey. So, who are the persons you admired and really supported you moving from 9 to 5 to now taking on this whirlwind of starting a construction tech company?
Yeah, I think number one is my wife. She like is the breadwinner. So she was very, very supportive of this. I think, even a layer further where she at the time, so she left her previous job at a startup in 2022.
Right.
And we like planned our wedding, and afterwards she was looking for a job, and like really she was going through kind of a career change, wanting to get more into data. And she kind of put that on hold for my sake. I did ask for it, but she did make the sacrifice.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I think by far she has been the most supportive and helpful. I think um, Tessa, who I mentioned, who's been such a great mentor, Martin Fisher um, from Stanford, he's been a great mentor. And I think a lot of the former versatile people who are kind of scattered all throughout the industry now, there's too many to name, like Ben Allen, Jared, Steve Cadeau, Jackie Gilbo, like all these people have been really, really supportive and helpful and generous with their time and so eager to give feedback. And yeah, that's been really great.
And so, like, I'm sure balancing between family time and start, like, it's a whirlwind starting a new company, right? Like, um, there's this phenomenon called entropy, right? And so that's the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says everything tends to disorder, right? And
Yeah,
so a company is called an organization because it's organized. It has processes already built
in theory.
in theory, and so, it's already administered how we're going to do things, right? But with a startup, it's a little bit more of a whirlwind. So how do you balance the time between the startup, family time, and juggling that with your personal, goals outside of work?
Yeah, I think, what we were talking about earlier about like in being intentional also
Mhm.
applies here. Because you're if you get some family time and you're just being snippy with your wife, like that's
Yeah,
not great. So I think, and this is obviously easier said than done, but I think exercising some mindfulness about that. So like um, for example, like if my head is about something at work or something like that, like and my wife is talking about her work, like my initial reaction, sort of my emotional response is like, oh, like
right,
she's like complaining about her work again, but like, do I want to hear it right now? But also thinking like noticing that that is the emotion that pops up and like kind of like understanding it and trying to put it to the side and then just really investing my attention into hearing what she's trying to say and actively listening, asking questions. I think that's probably the best way that I know how is like being intentional about the quality of time, not just the quantity of time.
yeah. No, that yeah, you hit the nail on the head on that one, because there's a lot of startups or just CEOs, like, the company takes so much of your time, right? And it takes so much to manage. Building it is hard, but also maintaining the level that you got to is also just as difficult, right? And you get consumed by just opting so many fires and making decisions that sometimes you get burnt out, and you have to recognize that that's work, but the reason why you're doing the work is so you can have enjoyment with your family, right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah, and these companies are companies that we work for, working on. When they become a entity of its own, and they can run past generations of yourself if done right, right? But you have a limited amount of time on this earth with yourself, your family, in good health,
Yeah,
standing, walking, and so, it's just like kind of reminding yourself constantly, like, what is separate and aside about this achievement, and high achievers, you double down and you focus on this goal that you're going after. You want to go along with you the people you love, and
yeah,
making that process of supporting you enjoyable, because
yeah,
if you are really great at work and the a-hole at home,
right,
you can get all the achievements at work. Like, you're fantastic, and you go home and it's empty, right? There's
right,
nobody who likes you, and your family hates you. Like, it
right.
doesn't bowl well. So yeah, that's the hard thing to balance. But I think, like you said, having the intentionality in, like, understanding this moment right now. This 5 minutes can stop an argument for the next week or two if I just not get snippy and just relax and hear the complaint of what happened on your work day, right? And then
Yeah,
really listen to it, make jokes or give serious feedback on it, right? So,
totally. And I think, the analogy that you used earlier of being a sun or a black hole, I
mhm,
think there's a concept called moral licensing,
mhm,
where people who do good things like rationalize doing bad things later on. And I
mhm,
think the trap that is so natural, and I think this is just the way humans are generally wired, is like, I've been a sun all day at work and it was taxing, it's exhausting. Why can't I be a black hole now?
right.
Or like, right? Or it's like, oh, I'm always the sun when we argue. Why can't I be a black hole now? And I think
Mm.
that is like, it's just something that happens. And I think that's something where like being mindful of that instinct and trying to, obviously mistakes happen, humans are
Yeah,
humans, but
and
trying to get over it.
it's crazy to that too. Like you find yourself being the son for the strangers, and then the
Yeah.
persons that are closest
Right?
to you
Yeah,
is the ones
exactly.
who get
Yeah.
the most,
Right.
the most work. The
Exactly.
person who cares about you the most. I mean, half the
Yes.
persons is a
Yes.
formal relationship. We're all agreeing contractually to meet up, put our
Yeah.
efforts together to work.
Yep.
But the person who is like genuinely in your corner, is the
Yep.
one who ends up getting
Yep.
the nasty side of it. But that's part of love too, is like challenge. I always and I'm sure you have this with your wife. Like part of my love for my wife is that she challenges me. Like she
Yeah,
doesn't,
totally.
like she's a strong-willed person, and like if I get out of line, she will definitely let me
You'll
know.
find out.
And
Yep.
yeah, she will not. She's not shy. I tell you that she's not shy. But I always think of like a lion and a lioness. Like they're on the jungle together. They're out in and she's strong-willed, but she still wants her lion to be there with her, right? Like yes, she can hunt herself, but
Yeah.
there's still like a pride and a pack, and there's love and energy there, but doesn't mean that you guys aren't going to clash, right?
Right.
And that clash sometimes actually produces a better product than if it was just you on your own. Like,
Right.
or for instance, our wedding, there are certain things that I was like adamant we do not need for the
Yeah.
wedding. Like she was like adamant we needed floor wrapping on the floor with our name on it. I'm like, I don't want to do it. It don't make sense. No, 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 no. And I did that. I was like, the only way I'm gonna agree to this is if you do it within this budget. And then I'll say, and she's like, okay, fine,
Yeah.
challenge on. And she did it within that budget, and it became like the wedding was nice, but it was really nice taking pictures on the floor wrapping because it was white. And
Hmm.
this was like an unintended consequence of it. It reflected off and so the photos came out
Oh, yeah.
immaculate just
Yeah.
because of that. And it would have been so much more darker in that room without the natural reflecting off, and it just looked so much nicer just having that. But I never had the
Amazing.
vision of that. I was just
Yeah.
thinking on the budget, and not trying to get out a certain spending. And she was like, "No, we need this." So yeah, good complementary skills to have between yourself and your wife. So it's good.
Totally. Yeah. When we were wedding planning, our friends were like, you should each list out like the three things that are most important to you. And that's like, that way you can compromise on the other things, but these three things like you don't compromise on. And Ellie's were like, was like the photographer, the music, and something else. And
Right.
mine was like budget, budget, budget. And I was like,
Oh,
it's
that's
like,
great.
God.
Yup. It's like, nope, we're not doing that. No, no,
Yeah.
no, no, please, no. It's like, Ramon, I'm not budging on this. We have to get this. Like,
Yeah.
this is when they make it. I'm like, all right. I mean, you have to do it within this budget. Whatever you do, if you can do it within this, I'm okay with it. I'll live with it. But yeah, it's funny. Like, I've worked around amazing engineers and architects and interior designer. And she had a good eye for certain things that I was like, all right, this is kind of like me at work. Like I
Yeah.
will propose something, like I'm like, but how are you paying for this?
Right.
Like, how
Where's
are
it
we
going to
going to
come from?
execute this? Like, this is not, the money doesn't come out of thin air, guys, like to execute this. So, no, but sometimes that challenge from the architect really pushes the design forward, right? And it
Right.
forces you into a corner where, like, okay, maybe, I didn't think this was going to be nice, but no, looking back, no, this is great. I'm happy I was a part of this project to build it in the way that they intended, right? So
Totally.
it's that nuanced balancing act between, pushing the design but also making it constructible that gives you those really wonderful buildings or built out spaces, like, it's Marvel, it's like a modern Marvel. So
Yeah, absolutely.
for you, how do you unwind or have fun outside of, open AI and taking care of family needs? Like, what's your?
Oh, it's a Scoreboard AI, by the way. I
Yes, I'm
wish I
sorry.
were the CEO of
Sorry.
OpenAI. That would be amazing.
Pretty amazing. So Scoreboard, my apologies.
It's all good. Yeah, I mean, I think like honestly, this may make me sound like a softie, but
Hmm.
I just like to snuggle with my wife and my cat. Like that is the
That's your
best
thing.
way to just immediately unwind. Yeah.
No, I like it. I mean, listen, it's whatever it takes for you, man. Like,
Yeah.
and it's an honest answer. Most people would say something else, but that right there is, that's the person you chose to spend the rest of your life with. So
Yeah, totally.
it's nice. Any movies when you guys, like, are you a movie watcher, or you guys like actively go out? Is like what's?
Yeah, so we don't watch a ton of movies, but we actually have a list that we're
Mm,
working through where it's like movies that she had seen as a child and I hadn't, and vice versa.
yeah,
And we go through them and see like if they still hold up or not.
gotcha.
So that's something we're definitely working through.
Perfect. Well, how can people reach out and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so scoreboardai.net is our
Mhm.
website. Um, LinkedIn, Charles Ma. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be the best way.
All right, perfect. And listen, I appreciate you coming on the pod. We just mentioned open AI, but I do see Scoreboard AI being a product that is going to revolutionize construction. So just whatever it takes on our side or anybody else who's listening, just reach out to us, and I will definitely make an effort to make it a success. Because one thing in one book I read was Good to Great. It's a great management book. It's about different types of leaders, right? And
Mhm.
some leaders, they come into an organization and they're polarizing, like, let's say a Jordan, but when they leave, there's a vacuum because they control everything. And then
Mhm.
there are these individual, what you would say, leaders that come in, or they call them level five leaders, right? Which galvanize people, not just by their direction on only, but they're willing to sacrifice for the team and make an effort to build out the product and whatever it takes. And I'm not going to toot you on your horn, but I do see you as a level five leader. And so whatever
Thank
it
you.
takes to make Scoreboard AI a success is what I intend to do, not just through this podcast, but whatever resources that can come across for you and your team. Okay?
Yeah, I appreciate that, my friend. I think that means a lot. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Keep safe, Charles.
Yes, sir. Have a good one, Ramon.
Have a
Take
good
care.
one.